You know that moment when you can feel everything about to go sideways, like when you're driving and see black ice ahead, but it's too late to hit the brakes? That's exactly what the conference room felt like that Tuesday morning in November, when Brian Collins walked in wearing his too tight navy suit and those ridiculous loafers with no socks. My name is Mark Thompson, and at 48 years old, I'd been the operations director at Atlas Supply Chain Solutions for 12 years. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Army handling logistics for the 82nd Airborne, everything from coordinating mess halls to moving entire battalions across 3 continents. When you've managed supply drops under fire in Afghanistan, civilian logistics should be a walk in the park. Turns out, corporate warfare has its own unique challenges. In the civilian world, my military experience translated to keeping $2.8 billion worth of supply chains running smoothly across the Midwest. I don't panic, I don't yell. When a shipment of critical automotive parts gets stuck in customs and Ford's assembly line is about to shut down, I'm the guy they call at 3 a.m. I carry a Leatherman multi-tool that's older than some of my employees, write with the same cross pen I've had for 15 years, and I know the middle names of every plant manager in my portfolio. The crown jewel of that portfolio was Aaron Wright. Wright Manufacturing had been our biggest client for 7 years, and their $750 million annual contract kept the lights on at Atlas. Aaron was old school in the best way, built his steel and automotive parts empire from nothing, starting with a single machine shop in Detroit back in the 70s. The man understood that business runs on relationships, not algorithms. He hated PowerPoints, despised buzzwords, and had zero patience for people trying to sell him solutions to problems he didn't have. We had a rhythm, Aaron and me. A nod meant proceed. Silence meant fix it quietly. A phone call meant drop everything because something was burning down. In 7 years, he'd never even hinted at taking his business elsewhere. That kind of loyalty is gold in this industry. Then our CEO, Gary Stevens, decided we needed to modernize. Gary and I went way back. We'd actually served together briefly at Fort Campbell in the early 90s. Good soldier back then, but somewhere along the way to the corporate world, he'd lost his backbone and started believing every consultant who walked through the door with a slide deck about transformation. Apparently, consistent record-breaking profits weren't exciting enough anymore for the board. We needed disruption. We needed synergy. We needed a vice president of strategic growth who looked like he'd been manufactured in a LinkedIn influencer's fever dream. Brian Collins breezed into our all-hands meeting like he was hosting a TED Talk. Fresh Stanford MBA, 34 years old, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having failed at anything important. What Gary conveniently forgot to mention in the introductions was that Brian's daddy sat on our board of directors. Classic nepotism wrapped in an MBA package and sold as fresh thinking. Team, Brian started, clapping his hands together like he was calling a huddle before the big game. I'm here to tell you that good isn't good enough anymore. We need to be great. We need to be agile. We need to trim the fat and leverage our core synergies to maximize stakeholder value. I sat in the back row, taking notes in my leather-bound notebook, a habit from my Army days when briefings could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophe. I'd seen guys like Brian before, usually during peacetime when some fresh officer would show up trying to optimize systems that had been working fine for decades. They blow in every few years, break everything they touch, collect their promotions or golden parachutes, and move on to wreck the next unit. My survival strategy was simple: keep my head down, protect my people and clients from their stupidity, and wait for them to implode under the weight of their own incompetence. The military taught me patience. In logistics, you learn that the most important battles are often fought quietly, behind the scenes, where nobody's watching. You don't win by making noise, you win by being indispensable. After the meeting, Gary nervously introduced Brian to me, probably hoping I could help him understand how things actually worked around here. Brian, this is Mark Thompson. He handles the Wright Manufacturing account. It's our keystone client. Brian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was all porcelain and ambition, the kind of smile they probably taught him in some leadership seminar. Mark, pleasure to meet you. I've heard some interesting things. You've been on this account for quite a while. 7 years, I said, keeping my voice neutral and offering my hand. His handshake was weak and sweaty, the kind that would get you laughed out of any NCO club I'd ever been in. 7 years, he repeated with a theatrical sigh, like I'd just confessed to some embarrassing personal failure. That's a lifetime in this industry. You get comfortable, stop innovating. I've been looking at the numbers, and frankly, the margins on Wright are stagnant. We're over-servicing them. Too much hand-holding. We're leaving serious money on the table here. My blood went cold, but years of military discipline kept my face neutral. Aaron values consistency above everything. He's not fond of change for the sake of change. Brian actually chuckled like I was a child explaining why I still believed in Santa Claus. "Mark, everyone loves change if you sell it right," Brian said with that patronizing tone that probably worked great on college freshmen. "I've been analyzing the data, really diving deep into the metrics. We're essentially running a charity here, not a business. It's time to optimize our service delivery model and set up a comprehensive quarterly business review. I want to meet this Aaron Wright character face to face." The Wright QBR was sacred ground. It wasn't a presentation. It was a conversation between two professionals who understood how things actually worked. We sat in leather chairs in Aaron's office, drank black coffee that could strip paint, and talked shop. No slides, no buzzwords, no BS, just two guys who'd built their careers on making sure stuff got where it needed to go, when it needed to be there. Aaron would ask about fuel cost variances, delivery metrics, customs delays. I'd give him straight answers with real numbers. We'd shake hands, and another quarter of smooth operations would be guaranteed. Bringing Brian into that room would be like bringing a used car salesman to a Medal of Honor ceremony. "Brian," I said carefully, "the way you'd explain basic safety procedures to a new recruit? Aaron doesn't do standard presentations. He's old school. Built his company on handshake deals and personal relationships." "Book it," he interrupted, turning away to check his phone like I was some junior clerk taking notes. "Send me your deck by Friday. I'll need time to polish it up, add some real strategic vision. We need to dazzle him. Graphs, projections, ROI calculations, the whole 9 yards. Show him we're not just moving boxes around, we're engineering supply chain solutions." I stood there watching him walk away, fluorescent lights humming overhead like the sound you hear in a morgue. He'd just ordered me to build a bomb and place it directly under our company's foundation. The worst part was, he had no idea what he'd just done. The next few days felt like watching a slow-motion car wreck. Brian turned my concise 3-page operational briefing, the kind Aaron actually read and valued, into a 40-slide monstrosity that looked like it had been designed by a committee of marketing interns having a collective nervous breakdown. Where I had real data, on-time delivery percentages, error reduction metrics, fuel cost optimizations, he inserted stock photos of diverse people high-fiving on mountaintops and slides titled, "Synergizing Tomorrow's Velocity Today." I kid you not, one slide featured a cartoon rocket ship with the Wright Manufacturing logo photoshopped onto the side. "This doesn't pop," became Brian's favorite phrase. Every time I tried to insert actual operational data, something Aaron would want to discuss, Brian would delete it. "Too dense," he'd say, or boring, or my personal favorite, "This doesn't tell the story we want to tell." What story was that? The story of how we were about to torch our biggest client relationship because some MBA thought reality was too complicated for a slideshow? I tried one last time, desperation clawing at my throat like when you're trying to radio for backup and the equipment keeps cutting out. "Brian, Aaron is 68 years old. He built his empire on steel and automotive parts, starting with nothing but a machine shop and a work ethic. If you show him a cartoon rocket ship, he's going to think we're mocking him and everything he's built." Brian stopped clicking and turned to face me, dropping his friendly consultant mask for a second to reveal the petty tyrant underneath. "You know, Mark, I'm getting a lot of resistance from you on this. I was told you were a team player. The team player trap, the oldest play in the corporate handbook. The moment you disagree with a bad idea, suddenly you're not collaborative or resistant to change. I'd seen this same dynamic in the military when some staff officer would come up with a brilliant plan that ignored basic logistics, and anyone with field experience who pointed out the obvious flaws would get labeled as negative or not supporting the mission. I'm trying to protect the relationship we've spent 7 years building," I said. "No," Brian snapped, his voice taking on that edge that revealed his true feelings about anyone over 35 in the workforce. "You're trying to protect your little fiefdom. You've been gatekeeping this client for years. That's why the account has gone stale. You're afraid of new ideas because they expose the fact that you've been coasting on old relationships instead of delivering real value. Coasting. I thought about the Christmas morning I spent on a conference call with customs agents in Detroit because a software glitch had misfiled critical F-150 engine components as decorative metalwork. I thought about the time I personally drove replacement hydraulic seals from Chicago to Aaron's plant in a blizzard because our regular courier had gotten stuck and Ford's assembly line was about to shut down. I thought about the 3 a.m. calls, the weekend troubleshooting sessions, the hundreds of small crises I'd solved before Aaron even knew they existed. Coasting. Right. Look, Brian sighed, checking his Apple Watch with the practiced gesture of someone who'd learned that looking busy was more important than actually being useful. I don't need you to present anyway. Clearly, you're not aligned with our new strategic vision. I'll handle the client interaction. You just sit there and take notes, answer technical questions if he gets bogged down in operational details. But let me drive the relationship going forward. He was demoting me in my own meeting, cutting me out of the conversation I'd maintained and nurtured for nearly a decade. A younger version of me would have fought back hard, would have marched straight to Gary's office and demanded satisfaction. But looking at Brian's unearned confidence, his complete disrespect for the work and the relationships that actually mattered, something inside me shifted. It was the shift from soldier following orders to general planning a campaign, from employee to architect of destruction. Okay, I said quietly. Brian looked surprised. He'd been gearing up for a fight. You're the VP, I said, closing my notebook with deliberate calm. If this is the direction you want to take, I'll support the team decision. The meeting was set for Friday morning at 10 a.m. I spent the next 48 hours in a strange kind of calm, like the eye of a hurricane where everything goes quiet before the real destruction begins. In the Army, we called it mission focus, that mental state where you stop worrying about outcomes and just execute your part of the plan. I didn't try to fix Brian's slides. I didn't run to Gary with warnings. I just did my regular work, answered emails, and waited. It's funny how peaceful you feel when you realize you have nothing left to lose. The boardroom on the 35th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, but Brian had drawn the blinds for optimal presentation lighting. The room felt like a tomb, all dark wood and leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. Aaron Wright arrived at exactly 9:58 a.m. The man had built punctuality into an art form over 5 decades of business. He wore a charcoal gray wool suit that probably cost more than Brian's monthly salary and carried nothing but a single fountain pen, the same Mont Blanc he'd carried for 20 years. No laptop, no tablet, no phone visible. Aaron believed that if you couldn't remember the important stuff without writing it down, it probably wasn't that important. Mark, he said, shaking my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent his early years working with his hands. Good to see you. You too, Aaron, I replied. It was the only time I used his first name in professional settings. Our small ritual of mutual respect between two guys who understood that business was personal, no matter what the MBA textbook said. Then Brian materialized like a shark sensing blood in the water. Mr. Wright. Brian Collins, VP of Strategic Growth. This is such an honor. I'm a huge fan of what you've built here, truly revolutionary stuff. Aaron looked at Brian's extended hand, then slowly at his face, taking in the expensive haircut, the designer suit, the practiced smile. He shook hands briefly, the way you'd touch a wet doorknob you couldn't avoid. Revolutionary. I sell steel and automotive parts, Mr. Collins. I don't revolutionize anything. I deliver what I promise, when I promise it, at the price we agreed on. Exactly. Brian pivoted without missing a beat, like a politician who'd just been asked about his stance on an issue he'd never considered. But how we deliver, that's where the innovation happens. That's where we can really add value to your operation. Aaron took his usual seat at the head of the conference table. I sat to his right, the spot I'd occupied for 7 years of these quarterly conversations. Brian positioned himself at the front of the room with his wireless presenter, dimming the lights even further for what he'd called maximum visual impact. Gentlemen, Brian began, his voice taking on the cadence of a motivational speaker, let's talk about the future of logistics. The first slide appeared on the massive monitor, synergizing tomorrow's velocity today in bold letters over a stock photo of a diverse group of professionals pointing at graphs. I heard Aaron inhale slowly through his nose, a long, controlled breath that I'd learned to recognize over the years. It was the sound he made when someone was about to waste his time in a spectacular fashion. Brian launched into his presentation with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed he was witnessing his own genius. He talked about vertical integration of ideation, blue sky thinking, and paradigm shifts. He paced around the room, making sweeping gestures while clicking through slides filled with meaningless graphs and corporate buzzwords that would have made a consultant blush. I watched Aaron throughout the performance. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was studying his hands, which were folded precisely on the mahogany table. His expression was perfectly neutral, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes that meant his patience was wearing thin. 10 minutes into the presentation, Brian clicked to his masterpiece, the slide with the cartoon rocket ship. This represents our vision for taking Wright Manufacturing's logistics into the stratosphere. We're talking about a complete reimagining of your supply chain ecosystem, leveraging cutting-edge technology to optimize throughput and maximize stakeholder satisfaction. Aaron raised his right hand exactly 2 inches off the table. It was a small gesture, but it cut through Brian's monologue like a sword through silk. "Where's my Q3 operational report?" Aaron asked, his voice quiet but carrying the authority of someone who'd been making life-or-death business decisions since before Brian was born. Brian blinked, clearly thrown off his script. "Well, Aaron, can I call you Aaron? We're really focused on looking forward here. Q3 numbers are somewhere in the appendix materials. What I really want to focus on today is the strategic vision for—" "I lost 2 shipments in Detroit last week," Aaron interrupted, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge that could cut glass. "Mark handled it. I want to know exactly why it happened. I want to know the variance on fuel costs for October. I want to know why your new API integration system failed 3 times on Monday morning." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brian's confident expression started to crack around the edges. He clearly didn't know any of this. Despite being the VP of Strategic Growth, he hadn't bothered to read the operational briefings, the incident reports, or any of the actual data that kept this relationship running. "Right. Well," Brian stammered, small beads of sweat appearing on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Those are, technical hiccups, growing pains as we optimize our systems. If you look at the big picture, the holistic view of our partnership." "Mark," Aaron said, completely ignoring Brian and turning his chair slightly to face me directly. "Explain the Detroit situation to me." I opened my mouth to respond. I had all the details memorized, a dock workers' strike combined with a software patch that had corrupted our priority flagging system. I'd personally coordinated with 3 different freight companies to reroute the shipments and prevent a production line shutdown that would have cost Ford $2 million per hour. But before I could get a single word out, Brian stepped between us. He literally stepped between me and Aaron, physically blocking my line of sight to our most important client. It was the kind of move that would get you court-martialed in the military, deliberately interfering with a direct order from a superior officer. "Mr. Wright," Brian said, his voice now taking on that condescending tone that management consultants use when they think they're explaining the obvious to slow children. "Mark doesn't need to bore you with operational minutiae. He's operational support. He handles the day-to-day tickets and troubleshooting. I'm here to discuss the strategic partnership vision. We can have our technical team email you a detailed report later if you really need to dive into the weeds." The room went absolutely silent. Not quiet, silent, like the moment after an explosion when your ears are ringing and you're not sure if you're still alive. Operational support. 12 years of building relationships, solving crises, saving millions of dollars. 7 years of quarterly meetings, late-night emergency calls, personal favors that went far beyond any contract. Operational support. I stood up slowly. The sound of my chair scraping against the polished floor echoed in the silence like a gunshot. "Mark," Brian turned toward me, looking annoyed that I was disrupting his performance. "We're in the middle of a presentation here." "You're absolutely right, Brian," I said, my voice deadly calm in the way that every NCO learns when they're about to end someone's career. "I'm just operational support, and it sounds like you have the strategic vision completely under control." I picked up my leather notebook and my pen, the same tools I'd brought to every meeting with Aaron for 7 years. "Where are you going?" Brian hissed, panic finally creeping into his voice as he realized that something was going very wrong with his perfect presentation. I looked directly at Aaron. Our eyes met across the conference table, and in that moment, a complete understanding passed between us. No words needed. He knew. I knew. Brian was about to learn what happens when you disrespect the wrong people. "I'm excusing myself from this strategic discussion," I said, my voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from dealing with actual crises instead of PowerPoint slides. I wouldn't want to bore anyone with operational minutiae. I walked toward the door with the measured pace of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Mark, sit down," Brian barked, his carefully constructed executive persona finally cracking to reveal the panicked child underneath. "This is completely unprofessional. You can't just walk out on a client meeting." I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped into the hallway. As it clicked shut behind me, I heard Aaron's voice, loud and clear for the first time in the entire meeting. "Mr. Collins, turn on those lights and sit down. We need to have a very different conversation." I walked down the hallway past the cubicles where junior analysts were pretending to work while obviously listening to every word. Past the break room where someone had left a motivational poster about teamwork. Straight to the elevator bank, I didn't go back to my desk to pack up personal items. I didn't stop by Gary's office to explain myself. I pressed the button for the lobby and rode down 35 floors in complete silence. By the time I reached the street, my phone was already buzzing. I turned it off without looking. The next few days unfolded like a controlled demolition. I took medical leave, stress-induced, which was technically accurate since Brian Collins was extremely stressful to deal with. From my apartment, I watched the chaos through my work email, which I could still access on my laptop. Subject line, urgent, Detroit crisis. From Brian to the entire team, need immediate contact info for Port Authority liaison, client escalation in progress. I knew the contact. It was Janet Martinez at Detroit Port Services. She didn't use the corporate CRM system. She used WhatsApp and only responded to messages that started with Buenos dias, Janet, because she appreciated when people made the effort to use Spanish. I deleted the email without responding. Another message came an hour later from Gary. Mark, whatever happened in that meeting, we need to fix this. Aaron is threatening to terminate the entire contract. Call me immediately. I didn't call. I was learning the power of strategic absence. When you're the person holding up the ceiling, you don't need to tear it down. You just step away and let gravity do the work. On day 3 of my absence, I got a text from an unlisted number that I recognized immediately. Aaron Wright. That was quite a performance yesterday. Impressive restraint. I smiled for the first time since the meeting. I aim to please. Collins doesn't know anything, does he? He likes rocket ships. I'm flying back to Detroit this afternoon. We should talk. Not about this contract, that's already over. About your future. Are you legally restricted? I pulled out my employment contract and flipped to the non-compete clause. Standard corporate boilerplate designed to scare people more than actually restrict them. Can't solicit existing clients for 12 months. Says nothing about clients soliciting me. Correct. Sit tight. Let them sweat for a week. I'm pausing all contract renewals pending review. 2 days later, the news broke. Wright Manufacturing was invoking the immediate termination clause of their contract with Atlas Supply Chain Solutions, citing material breach of service standards and professional conduct. The $750 million annual contract was gone, effective immediately. Brian lasted exactly 72 hours after that. The board didn't even wait for a formal review. They walked him out through the service entrance so clients and investors wouldn't see the security escort. Gary tried calling me directly. Mark, I know things got heated. Brian's gone. We can fix this. Name your price. It's not about money, Gary, I told him. It's about respect. Something you forgot we used to understand back when we wore the same uniform. I hung up and started Thompson Strategic Logistics from my kitchen table. Within a month, I had 4 clients, including Aaron. 6 months later, I owned the building where my office is located and had 12 employees, most of them veterans who understood that competence matters more than presentation skills. Last I heard, Brian is selling insurance in Phoenix after his startup folded in 3 months. Atlas got chopped up by private equity and sold for parts. Aaron called me just last week from Hamburg. Port strike, he said. They're saying 5-day delays. Already handled, I replied. Like coordinating supply drops in Afghanistan just with better coffee. Rerouted through Rotterdam 6 hours ago. You'll lose 12 hours, not 5 days. Worth every penny, Thompson. I hung up and looked out my window at Lake Michigan, finally understanding what it felt like to fly instead of just holding up the sky for someone else.